Hello petals, my name is Anais. I am a womb witch, a Rahani energy teacher, and a plant alchemist. Under Unfurling Alchemy, I guide women in reconnecting with their power, awakening their essence, and step into sovereignty. In these episodes, I am going to approach topics around womb mysteries, energy healing, and cyclic living. Hello petals, today I want to share a little bit about my journey with the womb with you, sharing a little bit of a storytelling episode where I'll walk you through part of my journey following the red thread and stepping into womb mysteries, and about how I went from being deeply disconnected from my womb into slowly finding my way back into relationship with her. Before we begin, it feels important to mention that in sharing my story today, it is likely that I will briefly mention experiences of physical violence, sexual abuse, and miscarriage. I will not go into the details in this episode, and those themes just may be part of what is woven in. So today, if those topics feel too tender for you, or if you just don't have the capacity today to listen to this right now, I invite you to pause here and to return for the next episode, which will be a guided womb meditation. Please always take care of yourself first. You are always your biggest compass. So my relationship with my womb, for a long time, it definitely wasn't a relationship of reverence or of connection. It was mostly a relationship of pain and discomfort and annoyance. And so, how did it all start? I got my first period when I was 11. I had a vague understanding that this was something that would eventually happen to a girl. Mostly at the time, I knew that that meant that now if I had sex, I could get pregnant, and that was something that we didn't want. But outside of that, there was very little understanding of what was actually happening inside my body. And biology lessons came on significantly later within my life. And I just remember one day waking up in the morning and seeing blood. And my mom had already gone to work. She had already left for work. So I took one of her sanitary towels, even though I didn't really know how they worked, but I assumed I needed to put them in my knickers, and put on a dress and went to school. And halfway through the day, I was sent home because I had bled through absolutely everything. And so I very quickly associated menstruation with shame, my bleed with inconvenience, with something embarrassing. And from that moment on, my relationship with my cycle became one of resentment. I felt like it was something that was just constantly in the way. It was messy, it was unpredictable because it was irregular at the time, and something I would much rather not deal with. I would rather it be gone. And so the start of the story, didn't lay the solid foundations into growing a nurturing relationship with my cycle. When I was 13, I decided to go on the pill. I grew up in, a quite challenging setup. I had some really beautiful pockets of love in my house, in my home, but there was also a lot of really complex family dynamics with a lot of violence, physical and emotional abuse, and also sexual abuse. And so going on the pill back then felt like the only way that I knew how to protect myself, because it meant that if anything happened, consensually or not, there would be no pregnancy. And at the time, that was the highest level of safety that I could offer myself. And after that, I stayed on the pill for many years. Quite quickly, I began to take it continuously, to be honest, skipping the breaks so I wouldn't have to bleed whenever I had an excuse for it. A holiday, a weekend away, plans with someone, I would simply continue to take the pill. 3 months, 6 months, when eventually I stopped and I had my bleed, it was extremely painful, heavy bleeding, severe cramps, crying on the floor, being sick because of how crippling the pain was. And outside of those moments around my bleed, I was experiencing a hell lot of intense ovarian pain. And at the time, I didn't know anything. I didn't know what that meant. I had no clue. I had no frame of reference either. Bleed was just something that was commonly accepted as being painful. And since it wasn't something that we really ever talked about, there was no frame of reference to understand if this was normal or not. So at the time, my womb just felt like something annoying, something inconvenient, something, that the only real function part of it that I liked was the sexual aspect, and everything else was just a nuisance. My late teens and early 20s were years where I was running away from what had happened in my childhood, running away in many ways, a lot of escapism, a lot of drinking, a lot of situations where I was far too drunk, intoxicated to be in a position to really give consent. There was very little connection to my body during those years, let alone to my womb. Then in my early 20s, my mom died, and losing her was the deepest grief that I ever experienced. And during this time, something else happened that pushed me further away from my body. I had a miscarriage. In the waves and the blur of the grief, I didn't even know that I had been pregnant. I only realized that I was as the miscarriage was unfolding. And I just remember feeling this enormous amount of anger and a deep, deep sense of betrayal towards my body. And after that, I wanted even more to distance myself from my womb. I just really remember even doing research in having a hysterectomy, because I was like, I just want it out. I just want it over with. I won't have children anyhow. And I thank the goddess today that didn't happen. But instead, since the hysterectomy was something that wasn't possible for me at the time, I chose to go on the coil. I first tried the copper coil, and it was beyond difficult for my body. I was constantly bleeding. I was bleeding for 14 days in a row. I was in pain. There was bloating. There was discomfort. It was just a mess. And so after 6 months, I switched onto the hormonal coil. And in many ways, I absolutely loved it, because my bleed stopped entirely. And at the time, that felt like such freedom, like such deep freedom. I could finally function like a man. And I could move through life without ever having to deal with my cycle again, without having to think about my womb. And for a while, that distance felt easier. But the truth is that, despite no longer bleeding, my body was still speaking, quite loudly. There was still pain. There was a constant heaviness. Ovarian cramps that would come and go, but would very much offer sleepless nights when it was there. And at some point in my 20s, I had received a diagnosis of PCOS. So even though I have found ways to silence my cycle, my womb had never really gone quiet. But life has this way of bringing us back to parts of ourselves that we have left behind, and for me, that return began quite slowly, as a remembering. At this point, I feel I need to mention that I didn't experience a big spiritual awakening in the way that many other people did, and I will probably tell you those stories at some point in another episode. But for me, all along, it was more like a remembering. And as a child, I felt so deeply connected to nature, connected to intuition, connected to something deeper. And I truly believe that that experience, that the trauma that I experienced during my teenage years and going on the pill, completely disconnecting me from my womb, also disconnected me from my inner wisdom and disconnected me from my intuition. And so I had many years of silence, many years of feeling completely disconnected from any form of spirituality and the world around me, and had completely lost my part within the cycle of life and within the cycle of nature. And it's actually when my mom died that unexpectedly, somewhere in the middle of all of that grief, my intuition started coming back. And my spirituality started to return, because I could feel the energies again. And over the years that followed, I explored many different traditions and teachings, reconnecting with that intuitive healer that had already been in me, that has always lived inside me. And by the time I encountered womb work for the first time, I had already reclaimed such big parts of my spirituality, but something had been missing. And so in those years where I was on the coil, I was like really deeply within like my spiritual studies. I had trained in many different traditions. I had really deeply reconnected, but my womb somehow had never been part of that reconnection. Because very often in the traditions that I had been following, the womb was simplified as the sacral chakra, sometimes a mix between the root and the sacral. But for me, that never fully landed. I always felt there was more complexity in that space, that I just didn't have the language for it. And then one day at a women's circle, a dear soul sister of mine mentioned a practitioner who worked with the womb and with plants. And it immediately resonated with me. Plants have always been one of my deepest spiritual connection, one of my very first teachers. So when I heard about someone working with both the plants and the womb, something in me recognized that path. And I attended a small taster session that was a connection between the womb and the heart, and it was a deep, deep experience with a lot of crying and a lot of remembering coming into place. And from that moment on, that really just opened up a journey over the last years, over the last 4 to 5 years of stepping into the womb mysteries, in studying hormones, anatomy, fertility awareness, energetical womb work, and really like following that red thread in all different types of directions, and sometimes gently guiding me deeper and deeper, and sometimes quite bringing in the energy of rupture and of cracking me open, but really bringing in this remembering of something ancient. So soon after stepping into that very first taster session, this mini session that cracked me open, that first connection, I had made a decision to get my coil removed and to meet my cycle naturally again. It took me a little while because I was terrified. My previous experiences with bleeding had been so painful that I was so terrified that the pain was going to come back, that it was going to bring waves of pain and grief and hidden trauma, and I was truly afraid of like opening up this Pandora box. But slowly things fell into place, and slowly things moved forward. And today I can honestly say that I look forward to my bleed. It feels like such a satisfying release of clearing of stagnant energy. And I no longer experience like any type of pain like I did before. And throughout this journey, I did realize how much was hidden away. How much trauma had been stored in my womb, personal trauma, ancestral trauma, sexual trauma, different layers of history and experiences and conditioning. And it felt as though my womb had somehow become the storage for everything my body had known how to process. And slowly those layers begin to soften and begin to release. Embarking on this journey with my womb has been honestly one of the most transformative experiences of my life. It has brought me a level of inner balance I didn't know was possible. A relationship with my body that I didn't know could exist. A level of sovereignty and inner wisdom that I didn't know was available. Witnessing that transformation eventually led me to begin holding space for other women. And women My clients, my women clients, come to me for this work for so many different reasons. Some are on a fertility journey, some are navigating conditions like fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS. Some of them are at thresholds of life, entering perimenopause and menopause. Some simply want to understand their bodies more, or more deeply. There are so many doorways to this work. But underneath all of them, there is usually the same thread, a longing to reconnect, to come back into relationship with our body. And honestly, I still find it so difficult to put into words just how transformational that journey can be. Because the womb work is not only about the womb. It is about remembering ourselves. It is about reclaiming our power. It is about stepping back into sovereignty. And that is one of the biggest journeys that we can ever embark on. If any part of what I shared with you today resonates, know that there is no rush. There is no perfect way to begin. The first step really is to listen, to simply listen. In this next episode, I will guide you through a short womb meditation so that you can gently begin meeting that space within yourself. Because for me really, the first step is to be in presence, is to learn how to listen and to meet whatever is coming up with curiosity. Thank you so much for joining me today and listening to my little womb storytelling. And I see you in the next episode. Bye bye, petals.